Today we're going to start section 7 from Reveal, Midpoints and Bisectors. Should say down here that this is only part 1. We're going to break this section up into 2 parts. And before we get started today, I have a question for you. Do you remember the definition of congruent? We've had that definition, and so do you recall the definition of the word congruent? Hopefully you got it right. Hopefully you remember congruent means same size and shape, or when we're talking segments, same length or same distance. And so the midpoint of a segment is the point halfway between the endpoints. Right? So the midpoint is the point in the middle. Hopefully that makes sense. You need to know the name. We're going to use the word midpoint a lot, pretty much all year. So you could say it's the point in the middle. You could say it splits the segment into 2 equal parts. All right, we'll come back to that in the part 2 part of this lesson. Another way to say this is also equidistant. If I am equidistant, then I'm the same distance from one point that I am from the other. And so, if we're looking at like 3 points on one line, I might be equidistant between these two and then not the beginning and the end. This is a good little example, midpoint right in the middle. So the first kind of midpoint we're going to deal with is midpoint on a number line. And there's a formula here, and just like in distance, on a number line, the formula is not as important, and it's a little bit more useful here. And also, it's very similar to the formula we'll get when we get to the midpoint on a coordinate plane. So it's perhaps a little more important to write down. One quick thing I want to point out is they always use this capital M for midpoint, but the point might not always be an M. All right, so we might be talking about point C being the midpoint of a line, but the formula will always be M equals. And so for this one, you're going to add up, this number at one end, this number at the other end, add them together, divide by 2. Let's look at an example of this. All right, an example 1 from your workbook here, XZ. Right? Now, I want to quickly draw a Y right here. That's meaningless to this problem, correct? So I'm only talking about I'm not care about this point out here. I don't care about out here. I don't care about Y. I only care about X and Z. And they're going to do that to you on the homework. Excuse me. They're going to do that to you on the homework. So I want you to prepare for that. Know what part of the segment, what part you're talking about. So I'm talking about the distance that's midpoint or halfway between X and Z. And so X is -3, Z is 8. I add those up and divide by 2. Well, those add up to 5. Divided by 2 is 2.5. And so 2.5 right here would be the midpoint. Let's get rid of that Y since we already talked about it. And so that point is halfway between X and Z. I could count as well, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 that direction, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 that direction, confirms that it's the midpoint. Take a second, look at B, look at D, and find the midpoint of segment BD. Give it a try. I'm going to go over the answer now. If you haven't already done so, you can pause the video and come up with yours. We're going to be talking about -1 and 6, which just like the last one ends up being 5. It's not a great example because it's the same answer, but hopefully you figured out it won't always be 2.5 every time or anything. It's just the math worked out to that for these 2 examples. All right, now let's look at it inside of a story problem. And so we're working at a vintage clothing store here, and we want to put up this sign for dressing rooms, and we want it to be exactly the midpoint between the front and end of the dressing room doors. Right? And so they measured from over here on the far wall to the first part of the door was 7.5 feet. And this part of the wall, or same wall all the way to the far part of the dressing room door, was 13.5 feet. And so the first thing I want to do is take those two numbers and subtract them, because that then is the width of these doors. And then I want to half that. And so 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now, this particular example doesn't really say what it really wants from us. And so you could say that the door needs to be, or the sign needs to be 3 feet from either edge of the door. All right, that would be okay. Maybe saying it needs to be 3 feet from X1 would be okay. Or I might say it needs to be 10.5. Where did that number come from? Well, it's the 3 plus 7.5, and so it's 10.5 feet from the wall. We all measured from the same starting wall there, and so it needs to be 10.5 feet from the wall. They weren't really specific with how they wanted you to state the answer, so any of those answers, as long as you explain it, would be correct. Midpoint formula. This is the formula you need to make sure you definitely get. And so this is the midpoint formula right here. I'm going to write it down separately, because this is the midpoint formula that we want to put in our notes for sure. The midpoint is the point, so that's why we got parentheses. All right, I want to erase that in parentheses because I might need more space than that. And so it's the x's added together, divided by 2, and the y's added together, divided by 2. So remember, now we're talking on a coordinate plane. So everything is a point with an x and a y. And so my answer is a point with an x and a y. Let's look at an example. And so for me, this is an x1, y1, and this is an x2, y2. And so I'm going to plug it into that formula we just wrote down in our notes. The midpoint is x1 from A there is -2, plus x2 from B is 8, divided by 2, comma, because it's going to be a point. Y1 is 1, plus y2 is 3, divided by 2. -2 plus 8 adds up to 6. 3 plus 1 adds up to 4. And so I would say my final answer is the point 3, because 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2, because 4 divided by 2 is 2. And so that is my final answer for the midpoint. Give this a try on your own here. A, B, C, or D. Plug in the coordinates from E and D and come up with your answer. Pause now if you would like. All right, hopefully you got the right answer. -6 plus 5 is -1 divided by 2 means the answer is either A or C. 2 plus 7 is 9 divided by 2 is A for the win. All right, we're going to stop there. We have more to do in this section, but I want to make it something that's a little bit easier here as we struggle with this virtual learning. Hopefully you're getting better at it. You can turn this assignment in on Schoology rather, or you can wait and show it in person if that is an option we have in this class. And so page 55, 2 through 12 even, 17, and then 20 through 26 even. Good luck.